The whispers started the day Sarah Whitmore turned 21, when her mother's cough had grown so violent it painted blood across the handkerchief, and Sarah knew in her bones that another hard season would leave her completely alone in this unforgiving world. It was 1873 in Nevada, Missouri, a town perched on the edge of respectability where the prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, and the good women of the settlement had already begun their cruel calculations about Sarah's future, or rather, her lack of one. Mrs. Patterson spoke first, her voice carrying across the general store with that particular tone reserved for pronouncing doom on unmarried women. "Poor thing will have nothing when Martha passes. No dowry, no family, no prospects. Mark my words, no man will want her in winter or spring, not with empty pockets and that stubborn streak." Sarah pretended not to hear as she counted out coins for flour, each cent representing hours of laundry work and mending. Her mother needed medicine, needed warmth, needed time that Sarah could not buy with all the scrubbing in the world. The words stung anyway, settling into the hollow place beneath her ribs where hope used to live. The autumn of 1873 brought an early frost to Missouri, and with it, Martha Whitmore's last breath rattled out on an October morning when the sky hung low and gray. Sarah sat beside the narrow bed in their one-room cabin, holding her mother's cold hand long after the soul had departed, trying to memorize the feel of not being entirely alone. She was 21 years old with $14 to her name, a cabin that would revert to the landlord at month's end, and a reputation for sharp words that had kept every potential suitor at arm's length. The funeral was sparse. Reverend Cole said words over the plain pine box, and a handful of townspeople attended out of obligation rather than affection. Sarah stood dry-eyed in her black dress, the only good garment she owned, altered twice already to accommodate years of wear. She felt their stares, heard their whispers carrying on the cold wind. What will she do now? No family out here. Parents came from Ohio, I heard, but there's no one left. Shame. Pretty enough girl, but too proud by half. Should have married the Cooper boy when he asked, even if he drinks. Sarah lifted her chin higher and ignored them all. She had survived her father's death from typhoid when she was 15. Had kept her mother alive for years past what the doctor predicted, had learned to shoot straight and bargain hard and swallow her tears. She would survive this too, though she could not yet see how. The answer came from an unexpected direction 3 days after the funeral, when Mr. Henderson, who owned the freight company, posted a notice seeking someone to cook for a trail drive heading south to Texas. The pay was modest, but included food and transport, and most importantly, it would take Sarah away from Nevada and the pitying stares, and the empty cabin that still smelled like sickness and death. She presented herself at Henderson's office the next morning, her hair pinned severely back, her expression set. Henderson looked up from his ledgers, surprise crossing his weathered face. "Miss Whitmore, I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. I'm here about the cook position." His eyebrows rose toward his hairline. "That's work for a man, miss. We're talking 2 months on the trail, sleeping rough, dealing with cowboys who ain't always gentlemen. I can cook for large numbers. I'm strong, I don't complain, and I need the work." Sarah kept her voice level factual. "You're offering $12 and transport to Fort Worth. I'm asking 15 and your word that any man who shows disrespect gets dismissed." Henderson studied her for a long moment, something like approval flickering in his eyes. "You negotiate like your daddy did. He was a fair man." He tapped his pencil against the desk. $14 and you have my word. But I'm warning you true, Miss Whitmore, it's hard living out there. We leave in 4 days, following the trail south before the real cold sets in. You'll be the only woman among 15 men. I'll manage." She spent the next 3 days settling her mother's debts, selling what little furniture they owned, and packing her life into a single worn carpet bag. The landlord took back the cabin keys without ceremony. On the morning of departure, Sarah walked to the edge of town where the freight wagons assembled, her bag in one hand and her mother's Bible in the other. The men gathered around the wagons turned to stare as she approached. They were the usual mix of types drawn to trail work. Young men seeking adventure, older men running from something, hard cases who preferred the lawless spaces between towns. Henderson emerged from checking the wagon hitches and nodded to her. "Men, this here is Miss Whitmore. She's our cook for this drive and she's under my direct protection. Any man who forgets his manners will walk back to Missouri. We clear." A rumble of acknowledgement passed through the group, along with some skeptical glances. Sarah met their eyes steadily, refusing to show uncertainty. She had learned long ago that men respected strength more than sweetness. "Wagons there, miss." Henderson pointed to the supply wagon at the rear of the train. "You'll ride up front with the provisions. We're burning daylight, so let's move out." The journey south unfolded in a rhythm of dust and distance. Sarah rose before dawn each day to build fires and prepare meals from the stores of beans, salt pork, cornmeal, and coffee. The work was grueling, her hands perpetually raw from handling cast iron over open flames, but she had known worse. The men kept their distance initially, uncertain how to treat a respectable woman in their rough midst. She learned their names gradually. There was old Pete, who drove the lead wagon, young Tommy, barely 17, seeking his fortune, the Miller brothers, who argued constantly but worked like matched oxen. And there was the trail boss, a man Henderson had hired just before departure, who kept to himself and spoke mainly to his horse. His name was Benjamin Irving, and Sarah first truly noticed him on the 5th day out when a wheel cracked on one of the wagons. While the other men stood around offering useless advice, Benjamin stripped off his coat and shirt, dropped into the dust, and worked the jack with methodical efficiency. Sarah, preparing the noon meal, found her attention drawn to the play of muscles across his shoulders, the competent sureness of his movements. He was perhaps 26 or 27, tall and lean with sun-darkened skin and dark brown hair that needed cutting. A scar ran along his left forearm, old and white against his tan. When he stood and caught her watching, his eyes were startling in their intensity, a clear gray-blue like water over stones. "Wheels fixed," he said simply, pulling his shirt back on. "We'll make good time to the next creek." "I'll have food ready in 20 minutes, Sarah replied, keeping her voice neutral. Benjamin nodded and walked away, and Sarah turned back to her cooking with a strange flutter beneath her ribs that she firmly ignored. She had no time for foolishness, and certainly a trail boss had no interest in a penniless woman running from whispers. But over the following days, she became aware of him in ways that unsettled her careful composure. He was always the first to offer help when she struggled with heavy pots, though he did so silently and without fuss. He made sure the men treated her with respect, shutting down crude talk with a single cold glance. And sometimes, when she looked up from her work, she found him watching her with an expression she could not read. They were 2 weeks into the journey when the first real trouble came. A group of drifters approached the camp one evening, 4 rough-looking men on tired horses who claimed to be heading north. Henderson, ever cautious, invited them to share the meal but kept his rifle close. Sarah served the stew and cornbread, aware of how the stranger's eyes followed her movements. The leader, a man with a broken nose and calculating eyes, watched her with particular interest. "That's mighty fine cooking, miss," he said, his voice too familiar. A woman like you must have a husband around here somewhere. She's under my employ and protection, Henderson said flatly. You do well to remember that. The stranger raised his hands in mock surrender. No offense intended, just making conversation. But after the meal, when Sarah went to the creek to wash the pots, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to find the broken-nosed man approaching, his intentions clear in his expression. A woman alone shouldn't be so unfriendly, he said, reaching for her arm. Sarah's hand went to the knife at her belt, but before she could draw it, Benjamin appeared from the shadows like a ghost. He moved with startling speed, catching the stranger's wrist and twisting it behind his back with controlled force. "The lady's not interested," Benjamin said quietly, but there was steel in his voice. "And you're leaving. Now." The stranger struggled briefly, then subsided when Benjamin's grip tightened. "We were just talking. You're done talking. Get your friends and ride out, or I'll make you wish you had." Something in Benjamin's tone convinced the man. Within minutes, the four drifters had mounted and disappeared into the gathering dark. Sarah stood by the creek, her heart racing, watching as Benjamin turned to face her. "You all right?" he asked. "I had my knife." "I know, I saw." He paused, his expression softening slightly. "But I couldn't stand by and watch." "Why not? You don't know me." Benjamin was quiet for a moment, the night sounds of the prairie filling the space between them. "I know you've been up before dawn every day, working until your hands bleed. I know you haven't complained once, though this life is harder than what you're used to. I know you're brave and proud and running from something that hurt you." He met her eyes directly. "And I know that any man who'd force his attention on a woman deserves worse than I gave him." Sarah's throat tightened unexpectedly. No one had seen her, really seen her, in longer than she could remember. "Thank you," she managed. "No need for thanks. Come on back to camp. I'll walk with you." They returned in silence, but something had shifted between them, fragile and new as spring ice. That night, Sarah lay in her bedroll beneath the wagon and thought about gray-blue eyes and careful hands, and wondered if perhaps the town women had been wrong about her future. The trail unfolded southward through Missouri and into Arkansas, following old routes that traders and drovers had worn into the land. The weather held clear and cool, perfect for traveling. Sarah fell into the rhythms of camp life, finding unexpected satisfaction in feeding hungry men and managing her small domain of pots and provisions. Benjamin began to seek her out in small ways. He brought her fresh game when he hunted, a rabbit or quail that made a welcome change from salt pork. He helped her gather firewood without being asked, stacking it neatly beside the supply wagon. And in the evenings, after the meal was done and the men settled around their own fires, he would sometimes sit near her, not speaking much, just present in a way that felt like companionship rather than intrusion. "You're quiet for a trail boss," Sarah observed one night, her hands busy with mending a torn shirt. "I talk when there's something worth saying." Benjamin poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the dark. "My father used to say silence was cheaper than words and twice as valuable. Is he still in Missouri?" "Dead. 10 years now. He was a rancher, got caught in a bad storm riding fence and froze before we found him." Benjamin's voice was matter-of-fact, but Sarah heard the old pain beneath it. "My mother followed him 6 months later. Broken heart, the doctor said, though I think she just didn't see a reason to keep fighting." "I'm sorry. It's past. I sold the ranch, took to trail work. Seemed easier than staying in one place with all those ghosts." He glanced at her. "What about you? What are you running from in Nevada?" Sarah considered deflecting, but his honesty deserved the same in return. "Pity, mostly. And voices telling me my life was over at 21 because I'm alone with no prospects." The whole town watched my mother die and waited to see what would become of poor Sarah Whitmore, too proud and too poor to make a good wife. "Their loss," Benjamin said simply. "You don't know me well enough to say that. I know enough." He met her eyes across the firelight. "I know you're stronger than half the men on this drive. I know you face each day without flinching, even when I can see you're tired to your bones. I know you're kind, even when you could be bitter." He paused. "And I know that any man worth his salt would count himself lucky to have you, winter or spring or any season at all." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Sarah's breath caught, her needle stilling in her hand. "Benjamin, I'm not asking anything of you," he said quietly. "I just wanted you to know that those voices were wrong, in case you were still carrying them." He stood and walked away before she could respond, leaving her staring into the fire with her heart beating hard against her ribs. That night, she lay awake and let herself imagine, just for a moment, what it might be like to be wanted not out of obligation or pity, but simply for herself. The drive crossed into Indian Territory in early November, following the trail that skirted the eastern edge of the vast lands set aside by treaty. The landscape shifted subtly, becoming wilder, less marked by settlement. Henderson doubled the night watch and kept the wagons close together. They encountered no trouble, but Sarah felt the weight of unseen eyes watching from the distant hills. Benjamin stayed closer to the main camp now, his rifle always within reach. The other men grew quieter, more watchful. On the third day through the territory, they came upon a small creek where Benjamin decided to stop for the noon rest. Sarah was unpacking provisions when she heard hoofbeats approaching fast. The men scrambled for weapons, but Benjamin held up a hand. "Wait, just one rider." A young Indian man appeared over the rise, riding hard on a paint horse. He pulled up short when he saw the wagons, his hand dropping to the knife at his belt. Benjamin stepped forward, hands visible and empty. "We're just passing through," he called out. "Heading south to Texas. We mean no harm." The rider studied them for a long moment, then spoke in accented English. "This is hunting ground. You should not make camp here. We'll move on shortly, just watering the animals and eating." Benjamin kept his voice calm, respectful. "We have food to share if you're hungry." The young man hesitated, then dismounted. Sarah, watching from beside the wagon, saw that he was barely older than Tommy, with sharp features and wary eyes. She made a quick decision and filled a bowl with stew from the pot that had been warming, adding 2 pieces of cornbread. She approached slowly, holding out the bowl. "You're welcome to eat." The rider took the food with a nod, and some of the tension eased from the camp. They learned his name was Little Wolf, and he was hunting far from his band's winter camp. He ate quickly, then mounted his horse again. "Go south before dark," he advised. "More warlike men hunt these lands, not of my people. They do not talk first." Benjamin thanked him, and the young man rode away as quickly as he had come. The drive packed up and moved out immediately, pushing hard until they crossed into Texas 3 days later. The landscape of northern Texas opened up before them, wide and rolling and brown with autumn. They were making good time, Henderson reported. Another 3 weeks would see them to Fort Worth. The men's spirits lifted with the milder weather and the promise of pay waiting at journey's end. Sarah found herself watching for Benjamin constantly now, her eyes drawn to him like iron to a lodestone. She noticed small things, the careful way he tended his horse, the patience he showed with young Tommy who asked endless questions, the rare smile that transformed his serious face. And she noticed the way he looked at her, with a warmth that made her feel seen and valued in a way she had never experienced. They were nearly to the Red River crossing when the storm hit. It came out of the west with little warning, a late autumn tempest that turned the sky black, and lashed the prairie with wind and rain. Henderson ordered the wagons into a defensive circle, and the men scrambled to secure the loads and calm the frightened animals. Sarah struggled to save what she could of the supplies, fighting the wind that tore at her skirts and threatened to rip the canvas covers from the wagons. A particularly vicious gust sent a bag of flour tumbling into the mud, and she lunged to catch it, slipping on the wet grass. Strong hands caught her before she fell, pulling her upright against a solid chest. Benjamin held her steady, his body blocking the worst of the wind. "Get under the wagon," he shouted over the roar of the storm. "It's not safe out here, the supplies. I'll handle it. Go." Something in his expression brooked no argument. Sarah scrambled beneath the nearest wagon, huddling in the marginal shelter as the storm raged overhead. She watched Benjamin's boots moving past, securing ropes and hauling provisions to safety. Other men worked alongside him, but her eyes followed only him. The storm lasted 2 hours, then moved east as quickly as it had come, leaving the camp sodden and chilled. One wagon had lost its cover entirely, and several bags of grain had been ruined by water, but no one was hurt. Henderson assessed the damage grimly. "We'll camp here tonight, dry out what we can. Miss Whitmore, can you manage a hot meal?" Sarah surveyed her scattered supplies and lifted her chin. "Yes, sir. Give me an hour." She built the fire with wood that Benjamin had saved by covering it with his own coat. Her hands shook from cold and exhaustion, but she got the flames going and set water to boil. The men gathered around gratefully, and she served hot coffee and beans that tasted like salvation after the misery of the storm. Benjamin was the last to eat, having stayed busy checking the animals and securing the camp. When he finally approached the fire, Sarah handed him a full plate and a cup of coffee so hot it steamed in the cooling air. "You should have eaten first," she said quietly. "Needed to make sure everyone else was settled." He took the coffee gratefully, wrapping his hands around the warm tin. "Thank you for this. Thank you for saving the firewood and for catching me." Their eyes met, and in that moment, Sarah felt the last of her resistance crumble. She had spent years building walls around her heart, protecting herself from disappointment and loss. But this man, with his quiet strength and steady presence, had somehow found his way through every defense. "Benjamin," she said softly, barely aware of the men around them, "when we get to Fort Worth." "Yes. What will you do after the drive ends?" He studied her face in the firelight, and she saw her own hope reflected in his eyes. "I was thinking about that," he said slowly. "Henderson mentioned he might need a man to manage his Fort Worth operations. It would mean settling down, staying in one place." He paused. "What will you do?" "I don't know yet. I have the money I've earned, but it's not enough to get far. I thought maybe I'd find work, save up, figure out where to go next." "You could stay in Fort Worth," Benjamin said carefully, "if you wanted. It's a good town, growing fast. A woman with your skills could find work easy enough." "Would you want me to stay?" The words escaped before she could call them back. Too vulnerable, too honest. Benjamin set down his coffee and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "Sarah, I'd want you to stay in any town I was in. I'd want you to stay through winter and spring and summer and fall, every season there is, if you were willing." Her breath caught. "The whole town said no man would want me. Then the whole town was blind and foolish." His grip tightened. "I've wanted you since the day you stood up to Henderson and negotiated your wage. I've wanted you every day since, watching you work and fight and refuse to break no matter what gets thrown at you. I'm not a man with pretty words, Sarah, but I know my own heart, and it's yours if you'll have it." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, clean and healing. "I never thought I'd hear someone say that, never thought I'd feel like this." "Like what?" "Like home. like I've been walking toward you my whole life without knowing it." She squeezed his hand. "Yes, Benjamin. Yes to Fort Worth. Yes to staying. Yes to you. Whatever you're asking, yes." He smiled then, that rare full smile that made him look younger and lighter, and Sarah felt warmth bloom in her chest. Around them, the other men were settling in for the night, but she was barely aware of them. There was only Benjamin and the future, unfurling before them like a map to territory unexplored. They talked late into the night, learning each other in words now that their hearts had already spoken. Benjamin told her about his dreams of having land again someday, a place to build something lasting. Sarah spoke of wanting a home, real and permanent, where she could put down roots and never feel alone again. They made no grand promises yet, but the shape of their future together seemed clear and bright. The final weeks of the drive passed in a strange suspension of time, each day bringing them closer to Fort Worth and the beginning of their real life together. Benjamin remained professional during the day, but in the evenings he sought her out, and they talked by the fire until the stars wheeled overhead. The other men noticed, of course. Old Pete grinned knowingly, and young Tommy asked earnest questions about courting that made Sarah blush. But Henderson seemed pleased, nodding his approval when he saw them together. "Irving's a good man," he told Sarah one morning. "Honest, hard worker, smart about cattle and men. You could do a lot worse." "I could never do better," Sarah replied simply. They reached Fort Worth on a bright December morning, the town sprawling along the Trinity River with new buildings rising like mushrooms after rain. The war had been over 8 years, and the country was growing again, pushing west with determined energy. Fort Worth sat at the edge of that expansion, part settled town and part frontier outpost, full of possibility. Henderson paid out the wages at his office on Main Street, adding a bonus for Sarah because, he said, her cooking had kept the men healthy and working. She tucked the money carefully into her bag, suddenly aware that this was the end of something and the beginning of something else. Benjamin found her outside the office, standing in the dusty street and looking uncertain for the first time since he had known her. "Sarah." She turned to him, and he saw the fear in her eyes. "Now that we're here, in the real world again, do you still mean it? Everything you said out there?" He closed the distance between them and took both her hands in his. "I meant every word, but I want to do this right, proper and respectful." He took a breath. "I'm going to find us a place to stay, separate and decent. I'm going to talk to Henderson about that job. And then I'm going to court you the way you deserve, with calling hours and church on Sundays and asking your permission before I so much as hold your hand in public. And when enough time has passed that the town knows we're serious and honorable, I'm going to ask you to marry me, if that suits you." Sarah felt her eyes sting again. "That suits me fine, but Benjamin—" "Yes, you don't have to wait to hold my hand." He laughed and laced his fingers through hers, and they walked down Main Street together toward whatever came next. True to his word, Benjamin found Sarah a room in a respectable boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Thompson. He took a room himself at a hotel nearby and started work with Henderson the next day, managing the receiving and sale of cattle and freight goods coming up from the south. The work was steady, and Henderson paid fair wages. Sarah found employment at a restaurant on Main Street, cooking for the lunch and dinner crowds. The owner, Mr. Chen, was an immigrant from China who had come to build the railroads and stayed to build a business. He appreciated Sarah's efficiency and her way with simple, hearty food. "You cook like you mean it," he said approvingly. "No fuss, just good eating." The work was hard but satisfying, and the pay was better than anything she could have earned in Nevada. More importantly, it gave her independence and purpose while she and Benjamin navigated the delicate business of building a life together. He called on her 3 evenings a week, sitting in Mrs. Thompson's parlor under the eagle eye of the widow who took her chaperoning duties seriously. They talked about everything and nothing, learning the small details of each other's lives. Sarah discovered that Benjamin loved to read, but had never had much opportunity for schooling. She learned that he was left-handed, that he hated the taste of whiskey but liked beer, that he had a younger sister somewhere in Kansas he had lost touch with and hoped to find someday. Benjamin learned that Sarah could recite poetry she had memorized as a child, that she was afraid of thunder but never showed it, that she dreamed of having a garden someday with vegetables and flowers mixed together. He learned the sound of her laugh, rare and precious, and made it his mission to coax it out as often as possible. On Sundays, they attended services at the Methodist church, sitting together in the back pew. Afterward, they walked along the river, carefully proper in public but alive to each other's presence. Benjamin pointed out places where new buildings were going up, talked about the town's future and his hopes for being part of it. Henderson's talking about expanding, maybe starting a ranch operation to the west, he told her on a cold January afternoon. He asked if I'd be interested in managing it. It would mean real money, Sarah, enough to buy land, build a house. Is that what you want? What I want is a life with you in it. The rest is just details. He stopped walking and turned to face her. But yes, I'd like to have a place of our own, room for horses, maybe cattle, a kitchen with a real stove for you, bedrooms for. He paused, color rising in his cheeks, for children. Sarah asked softly, if you wanted them, if we were blessed that way. His eyes searched hers. I know we're not properly engaged yet, but I can't help planning for it. Is that too forward? Sarah shook her head, her heart full. No, I think about it too. A home, a family. Things I never let myself imagine before. Imagine them now, Benjamin said. Imagine them with me. Winter softened into spring, and Fort Worth bloomed with wildflowers and new construction. Benjamin's work expanded as Henderson's business grew. He hired on additional help and gave Benjamin more responsibility, along with a raise in pay. Sarah continued at the restaurant, saving every penny she could spare. They had been in Fort Worth 6 months when Benjamin appeared at her boarding house on a Sunday afternoon in March, dressed in his best suit and carrying a small box. Mrs. Thompson showed him into the parlor with a knowing smile and left the door conspicuously ajar. Sarah, Benjamin said, and there was a tremor in his voice she had never heard before. I know we said we'd take this slow and proper, but 6 months feels like a lifetime when I think about all the years I want with you. He knelt on Mrs. Thompson's worn carpet, the box open in his hands. Inside was a simple gold band with a small blue stone set into it. That's a sapphire, he said. Belonged to my mother. It's the only thing I kept when I sold the ranch. I always thought I'd give it to the woman I married if I was lucky enough to find her. He looked up at her, his eyes bright. Sarah Whitmore, you're the strongest, bravest, most wonderful woman I've ever known. You make me want to be better, do more, build something lasting. Will you marry me? Will you take me for your husband and let me spend every season of my life proving that you're wanted and loved and cherished? Sarah sank to her knees in front of him, tears streaming down her face. Yes. Oh, Benjamin, yes. Winter, spring, summer, and fall, every season, every day, yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, and then he was kissing her properly and thoroughly, Mrs. Thompson's rules forgotten in the moment. Sarah kissed him back, tasting salt from her tears and the sweetness of joy long denied. When they finally pulled apart, Mrs. Thompson was standing in the doorway with an enormous grin. About time, she said. I'll put the kettle on. We need to start planning a wedding. They were married 6 weeks later in the Methodist church, on a bright May morning when the world seemed new and full of promise. Sarah wore a dress of pale blue cotton that she had sewn herself with help from Mrs. Thompson and two other women from the boarding house. Benjamin wore his suit and a look of such transparent happiness that it made Sarah's heart ache. Henderson gave the bride away, gruff and proud. Old Pete and several men from the drive attended, along with Mr. Chen and his family, Mrs. Thompson, and a surprising number of Fort Worth citizens who had come to know and respect the hard-working couple. Reverend Matthews performed the ceremony, and when he pronounced them husband and wife, Benjamin kissed Sarah with a tenderness that promised years of devotion. They held a simple reception at the restaurant, Mr. Chen's gift to them. There was food and music and dancing, and Sarah laughed more than she had in her entire life. Late in the afternoon, Benjamin swept her into a waltz, and as they turned together in the spring sunlight, he whispered in her ear, "Every season, Sarah Irving, I'm going to love you every season. And I'll love you right back, Benjamin Irving, every single one." They spent their wedding night in a hotel room that Benjamin had rented and filled with wildflowers. He was gentle and patient, and Sarah discovered that love could be expressed in touch as well as words. They lay together afterward, her head on his chest, his arms around her, and talked about the future until exhaustion and contentment pulled them into sleep. The next morning, they moved into a small house that Benjamin had been quietly arranging for weeks. It was simple, just 3 rooms on the edge of town, but it had a good stove and windows that let in the light, and to Sarah it looked like a palace. "It's just for now," Benjamin said, watching her explore with shining eyes. "Until I've saved enough for the bigger place, the one with land for horses and cattle." "It's perfect," Sarah said firmly. "It's ours, and that makes it perfect." They settled into married life with the ease of 2 people who had been moving toward each other all along. Sarah continued working at the restaurant for a while, though Mr. Chen understood when she told him she would leave once she was expecting a child. Benjamin threw himself into Henderson's expanding operations, proving himself invaluable. By the time summer arrived, hot and bright over Texas, Benjamin had been promoted again. Henderson offered him the ranch manager position he had mentioned, overseeing a new cattle operation west of Fort Worth. The pay was substantial, and it came with a house on the property. "It's your dream," Sarah said when Benjamin told her. "You should take it." "It's only a dream if you're there too. What about your work at the restaurant? Mr. Chen will understand. And Benjamin, I'm fairly certain I'm carrying our child. I was going to leave anyway in a few months." Benjamin went very still, his eyes searching her face. "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be this early. I haven't bled in 2 months, and I've been sick most mornings." He let out a whoop of joy that startled her, then swept her into his arms and spun her around the small kitchen. "A baby." "Sarah, we're going to have a baby," she laughed, dizzy and happy. "Put me down before you jostle it loose." He set her down carefully, then dropped to his knees and pressed his face against her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. I'm your father, and I already love you more than anything." Sarah stroked his hair, overcome with emotion. A year ago she had been alone and hopeless, certain her life was over. Now she had a husband who adored her, a child growing inside her, and a future so bright it made her chest ache with gratitude. They moved to the ranch in August, a sprawling property with good grass and water. The house was larger than their town cottage, with real glass windows and a covered porch. Sarah set about making it a home while Benjamin hired ranch hands and started building the herd. The work was demanding, but Benjamin thrived on it. He was up before dawn and often worked past dark, but he always made time for Sarah, sitting with her in the evenings and talking about their day. As her pregnancy advanced, he grew increasingly protective, insisting she rest and taking over tasks she had always done. "I'm having a baby, not dying," she protested when he tried to carry her up the porch steps. "Humor me. I lost my parents young, Sarah. I can't lose you too." The vulnerability in his voice made her relent. She let him fuss, understanding that his care came from love and old fear. And truthfully, as autumn arrived and her belly swelled, she was grateful for his help. The ranch prospered under Benjamin's management. He had a gift for judging cattle and men, and he ran the operation with firm fairness that earned loyalty from his workers. Henderson visited frequently, pleased with the returns on his investment. By November, they had nearly tripled the herd size and had buyers lined up for spring. Sarah's time came in late February, during a cold snap that glazed the water troughs with ice. The labor started at dawn, waves of pain that stole her breath. Benjamin rode hard to town for the doctor, leaving one of the ranch hand's wives, Mrs. Martinez, to sit with Sarah. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the day and into the night. The doctor arrived and did what he could, but mostly it was Sarah's battle to fight. She thought of her mother, of all the women who had done this before her, of the child she wanted so badly to meet. And when Benjamin was finally allowed into the room, she gripped his hand and pulled strength from his presence. Their son was born just after midnight, coming into the world with a lusty cry that announced his displeasure at the cold and the light. The doctor cleaned him and placed him in Sarah's arms, and she looked down at the red, wrinkled face and felt love so fierce it was almost frightening. "A boy," she whispered. "Benjamin, we have a son." Benjamin touched the baby's tiny hand with one finger, his expression full of wonder. "He's perfect. You're perfect. I can't believe he's ours." They named him James after Benjamin's father, with the middle name of Thomas for Sarah's father. Jamie, they called him, and he became the center of their world. The months that followed were exhausting and joyful in equal measure. Sarah had help from Mrs. Martinez and the other ranch wives, women who welcomed her into their circle with warmth. Benjamin was a devoted father, rising in the night to bring Jamie to Sarah for feeding, walking the floor with his son when colic struck, talking to the baby about cattle and horses as if he could understand. Spring came early that year, mild and green. The ranch continued to prosper, and Henderson began talking about expanding further, perhaps into breeding horses as well as cattle. Benjamin's reputation grew, and other ranchers sought his advice. On their second wedding anniversary, Benjamin came home early from the range with a package wrapped in brown paper. Sarah, sitting on the porch with Jamie sleeping in her lap, looked up in surprise. "What's this? Open it." Inside was a deed, legal and official. Sarah scanned the words, her heart beginning to pound. "Benjamin, this is 200 acres adjoining the ranch. Henderson's selling off some of his holdings and he gave me first right. I used everything we've saved, but it's ours now, Sarah. Our land in our name. We're not just managing someone else's dream anymore. We're building our own." Sarah stood carefully, settling Jamie into his cradle, then threw her arms around her husband's neck. "It's everything. You're everything." "We're everything together," he corrected, holding her tight. "You, me, Jamie, this land. Every season, just like I promised." The years unfolded in a rhythm of work and growth. They built a larger house on their own land, a sturdy structure with a wide porch and a kitchen that was Sarah's pride. Benjamin expanded the herd, added horses, and developed a reputation for breeding quality stock. Sarah managed the household and raised Jamie, and when their second child came, a daughter they named Emma, their family felt complete, but life had more in store. 2 years after Emma came another son, Robert. And 3 years after that, twin girls, Lily and Grace, who arrived during a thunderstorm and seemed determined to live up to the drama of their birth. the house filled with noise and love and the chaos of children. Sarah, who had once believed she would die alone and unwanted, found herself surrounded by family. Benjamin, who had thought himself destined for solitary wandering, became a man rooted deep in land and love. The ranch grew into one of the most successful operations in the region. Benjamin hired good men and treated them fairly, and they repaid him with loyalty and hard work. Sarah became known for her hospitality, feeding ranch hands and neighbors alike from her abundant kitchen. Their children grew strong and wild, learning to ride almost before they could walk. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Benjamin took Sarah riding out to the ridge that overlooked their land. It was spring again, the season they had married, and the prairie was carpeted with wildflowers. They sat together on the hilltop, watching their cattle graze in the distance and their children play near the house below. "You ever think about Nevada?" Benjamin asked. "About the people who said those things?" "Sometimes," Sarah admitted, "but not with anger anymore. They were wrong, and their wrongness gave me the push I needed to find this life, find you. I think about what might have happened if you hadn't taken that cook job, if I hadn't been on that drive." Benjamin shook his head. "We might have missed each other entirely, but we didn't. We found each other exactly when we needed to." Sarah leaned against his shoulder. "You told me once you'd want me every season. You've proven that every day for 10 years. And I'll prove it every day for the next 50 if God grants us the time." He kissed the top of her head. "You're my home, Sarah Irving, my heart, my every season." The years continued their march. Jamie grew tall and serious with his father's way with horses and his mother's stubborn determination. Emma was quick and clever, always reading, always asking questions. Robert was the peacemaker, gentle and kind. The twins were wild and inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and getting into mischief together. Benjamin's sister, Catherine, found them through a letter that took 2 years to reach its destination. She had married a shopkeeper in Kansas and had 3 children of her own. The families began to visit back and forth, knitting together ties that had been broken by time and distance. Henderson, growing older, eventually sold his operations to Benjamin at a price that was more than fair, saying he trusted no one else to maintain what they had built together. The ranch became the Irving Ranch officially, a name that carried weight across Texas. Sarah's hair began to show silver as she moved through her 30s and into her 40s, but Benjamin thought she had never been more beautiful. The years had given her confidence and peace, had softened the sharp edges that pain had carved. She moved through their home like a queen in her kingdom, capable and calm and loved. Benjamin's face grew lined from sun and wind, his hands scarred from years of ranch work, but he was still the man who had caught Sarah by the creek on that long-ago trail drive. Still quiet, still strong, still looking at her like she was the answer to every question he had ever asked. On their 25th anniversary, their children, now grown or near grown, threw them a celebration. Half the county attended, it seemed, gathering at the ranch for food and music and dancing. Jamie, now 23 and engaged to a rancher's daughter from the next county, gave a toast that made Sarah cry. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass, "who taught us that love is built on respect and partnership, who showed us that strength comes in many forms, who proved that the best things in life are worth working for every single day." The crowd cheered, and Benjamin pulled Sarah into a waltz, just as he had at their wedding all those years ago. As they turned together under the stars, he whispered in her ear, "Every season, Sarah, just like I promised." "Every season," she agreed, "and I'd choose them all again with you." The music swelled around them, and they danced surrounded by the family. and the life they had built from nothing but determination and love. Sarah thought about the girl she had been, standing in the general store in Nevada, hearing women pronounce her future dead before it had begun. She thought about the long trail south, the storms and the fear, and the moment she had first let herself hope. And she thought about the man who held her now, who had seen her when she felt invisible, who had wanted her when she believed herself unwanted, who had loved her steadily through every season of their shared life. The ranch would continue. The children would make their own way in the world, carrying forward the lessons they had learned. The land would endure, green in spring, golden in summer, russet in fall, stark in winter. And through all the seasons still to come, Sarah and Benjamin would walk together, their love the constant that made everything else possible. In a small town in Missouri, perhaps someone still told the story of Sarah Whitmore, the girl with no prospects. But out in Texas, on a ranch that stretched toward the horizon, there was a different story being lived. A story of love found in unlikely places, of two people who had chosen each other and built something lasting. A story that proved that sometimes the whispers are wrong, and the future is brighter than anyone dared to imagine. Emma married a schoolteacher from Fort Worth, a quiet man who loved books as much as she did. They settled in town and started a school that became known throughout the region for excellence. Robert took to ranching like he was born to it, eventually managing the day-to-day operations alongside his father. The twins, inseparable as ever, both married brothers from a neighboring ranch and lived within a mile of each other, raising their children as one extended family. Sarah and Benjamin became grandparents many times over, their house filling periodically with the chaos of visiting grandchildren. They taught the little ones to ride, to identify wildflowers, to work hard and love fiercely. Sarah told them stories of the trail drive that had brought their grandparents together, and Benjamin showed them how to gentle a horse with patience instead of force. As they moved into their 60s, they slowed down but never stopped. The ranch remained productive under Robert's capable management, and Benjamin served as an advisor more than an active hand. Sarah's kitchen still produced abundant meals, though she had help now from daughters-in-law and granddaughters who wanted to learn her recipes and her wisdom. On quiet evenings, they sat together on the porch they had built 30 years earlier, watching the sun set over land they had made their own. Sometimes they talked about the past, but more often they simply sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, content in each other's presence. "Do you have regrets?" Sarah asked one evening when the sky was turning purple and gold. Benjamin considered the question seriously, as he considered everything. "I regret the years before I knew you, not because they were wasted, but because I could have been loving you longer. We had the time we had, and we used it well. That we did." He squeezed her hand gently. "What about you? Any regrets? Only that my mother didn't live to see this, to know that her daughter didn't end up alone and unwanted after all." Sarah smiled. "But I think she knew at the end that I'd be all right. She told me to be brave, and I tried to honor that. You're the bravest person I know. I had a good reason to be brave. I had you waiting at the end of the journey." They sat together as the stars emerged, one by one, lighting up the vast Texas sky. Somewhere on the ranch, cattle lowed softly. In the house behind them, a grandchild laughed at something. The night wind carried the scent of grass and earth and home. Winter came again, as it always did, but it held no fear for them now. They had weathered too many seasons together, had built something too strong to be shaken by cold or hardship. When snow fell, rare but beautiful in Texas, they watched it from the warmth of their home, surrounded by the evidence of their shared life. Spring followed winter, as eternal and reliable as their love. The wildflowers returned, painting the prairie in colors that never failed to make Sarah catch her breath. Benjamin planted a garden for her near the house, mixing vegetables and flowers just as she had once dreamed, and she tended it with gnarled but gentle hands. Summer brought the heat and the work of haying and preparing for the annual cattle sales. Even in their later years, Sarah and Benjamin were part of the rhythm of ranch life, contributing what they could, valued for their experience and wisdom. And fall, beautiful and melancholy, reminded them that time was precious and finite. They made sure to tell their children and grandchildren often that they were loved. They wrote down the stories of their lives, wanting the next generations to know where they had come from and what had been overcome to build this legacy. On their 40th anniversary, the family gathered again, even larger now with great-grandchildren toddling around. Jamie, now a grandfather himself, stood to make another toast. 40 years ago, a woman was told she had no future, no prospects, no hope, and a man was drifting, rootless, searching for a reason to stay in one place. He looked at his parents with open affection. They found each other on a trail drive heading south, and they built this, all of this. The ranch, the family, the love that holds us all together. They proved that what others say about you doesn't matter as much as what you believe about yourself and the person standing beside you. He raised his glass higher. To Mom and Dad, to 40 years of choosing each other every season, every day, may we all be so blessed. The family cheered and drank, and then the music started, fiddles and guitars creating melodies that pulled people to their feet. Benjamin stood and offered his hand to Sarah. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Irving?" "Always, Mr. Irving." They moved together slowly now, their steps smaller and more careful, but the grace between them was undiminished. Sarah rested her head against Benjamin's shoulder, and he held her close, and for a moment they were young again, dancing at their wedding with the whole future ahead of them. "Every season," Benjamin murmured. "Every season," Sarah echoed. The music played on, and the family celebrated around them, and the stars watched over the ranch that love had built. Years passed, as they do, bringing changes and constants in equal measure. Technology came slowly to the ranch, new ways of doing old work, but the fundamental rhythms remained unchanged. The land demanded care, the animals needed tending, and family required love and attention. The Irvings provided all three with the same steady dedication that had built their empire. Sarah and Benjamin grew old together with the same grace they had brought to everything else in their shared life. Their bodies slowed and ached, but their love remained vibrant. They marked each other's birthdays and their anniversary with quiet celebration, grateful for each year granted. On a spring morning much like the one when they had married, when Sarah was 72 and Benjamin 77, they rode out together to the ridge where they had so often gone to talk and dream. The ride was slower now, their horses chosen for gentleness rather than speed, but the view from the top was as spectacular as ever. "It's beautiful," Sarah said, as she always did. "It is," Benjamin agreed. "We made something good here, didn't we? We made something wonderful. A life, a family, a legacy." She looked at him, this man who had loved her through decades and seasons without number. "I would do it all again exactly the same way." "So would I, though maybe with less arthritis this time around." He smiled to soften the complaint, and Sarah laughed. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the land they had shaped and been shaped by. In the distance, they could see Robert working with some of the hands, keeping the ranch running with the same dedication his father had shown. Closer to the house, grandchildren played in Sarah's garden, their laughter carrying on the wind. "We did good," Benjamin said softly. That town in Missouri was wrong about you, dead wrong. They didn't know me, but you did. You saw me when I couldn't see myself." Sarah took his hand, their fingers interlacing with the practice of decades. "You wanted me when I thought I was unwanted. You loved me in every season, just like you promised. Easiest promise I ever kept." They rode back to the house slowly, taking their time, savoring the warmth of the sun and the beauty of the land. That night, they fell asleep in the bed they had shared for 45 years, holding hands across the space between them. Benjamin passed quietly in his sleep 3 years later, his heart simply deciding it had beaten enough times, had loved enough, had done its work. Sarah woke to find him peaceful and still beside her, and though grief crashed over her in waves, there was gratitude mixed with it. They had been blessed with time, with love, with a life so full it could barely be contained. The funeral drew hundreds of people, a testament to the man Benjamin had been and the impact he had made. Sarah stood surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, a family tree that had grown from the love she and Benjamin had planted together. She lived 5 more years, filling them with the same purpose and strength that had defined her entire life. She worked in her garden, taught her great-grandchildren to cook, told stories about their grandfather that made him live again in their imaginations. And on quiet evenings, she sat on the porch and talked to Benjamin as if he were still there, because in all the ways that mattered, he was. When her time came, she went peacefully, surrounded by the family she and Benjamin had created. Her last words were a smile and a whisper. "Every season, my love, I'm coming." They buried her next to Benjamin on the ridge they had loved, under the vast Texas sky. The headstone was simple: Sarah and Benjamin Irving, together in every season. The ranch continued under Robert's guidance, and then his children's after him. The story of Sarah and Benjamin became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. The girl who was told no man would want her, and the cowboy who wanted her in every season, who built an empire from love and determination, who proved that the cruelest voices are often the wrongest. Their legacy lived on in the land they had shaped, in the family they had created, in the love that had been the foundation of everything. And on spring mornings when the wildflowers bloomed across the prairie, it seemed possible to feel their presence still. 2 souls who had found each other against the odds and held on through every season, every challenge, every joy. The house still stood, maintained and cherished by those who came after. Sarah's kitchen still fed hungry people, though other hands worked the stove now. Benjamin's horses still ran in the pastures, their descendants carrying forward the bloodlines he had so carefully cultivated. And on the porch where they had sat so many evenings, watching the sunset and talking about their days, you could almost see them still, holding hands and loving each other with the quiet constancy that had defined their years. In Nevada, Missouri, the town had changed beyond recognition from the small settlement where Sarah Whitmore had once listened to women pronounce her future. No one remembered the whispers about the girl with no prospects. But in Texas, on a ranch that bore the Irving name, the story lived on. Not as a tragedy or a cautionary tale, but as a romance for the ages, a testament to the truth that love finds its way, and that the best futures are the ones we build ourselves, with the right person beside us, in every season the world has to offer. The church in Fort Worth, the one where they had married, installed a stained glass window in their memory, donated by their children. It depicted a prairie scene with wildflowers and a couple standing together, looking toward the horizon. Beneath it, an inscription read, "They found each other in the wilderness and built paradise together. May we all be so blessed." Jamie's grandchildren heard the story and wrote it down, preserving it for future generations. It became a book that circulated through the family, added to and embellished, but always truthful in its core. Sarah and Benjamin had loved each other truly, deeply, and permanently through every season of their shared life. The ranch prospered through the generations, adapting to new times while honoring old values. The Irving name became synonymous with quality cattle, fair dealing, and strong family values. And at the heart of it all was the story of two people who had refused to accept the limitations others tried to place on them, who had chosen each other and built something that outlasted them both. Visitors to the ranch were often taken to the ridge where Sarah and Benjamin were buried. Standing there, looking out over the rolling Texas landscape, it was easy to imagine them as they had been, young and hopeful and building their dream. It was easy to understand why they had fought so hard to make this place their own, why they had poured their lives into the land and each other. And on certain spring mornings, when the light hit just right and the wildflowers bloomed in profusion, ranch hands swore they could see two figures on the ridge, holding hands and watching over the land they loved. Whether it was truth or wishful thinking, no one could say for certain. But it was a comfort to think that love like theirs didn't simply end, that it lingered on in the places it had been strongest, in the land it had shaped, in the family it had created. The story of Sarah and Benjamin Irving became more than just family history. It became a reminder that the future is never written until we write it ourselves, that love is the strongest force we possess, and that the voices of doubt and limitation are powerless against determination and partnership. They had proven that no matter what others say, no matter how hopeless things seem, there is always the possibility of finding your person, your purpose, your place. And they had proven, beyond any shadow of doubt, that when someone truly wants you, they want you in every season, through every challenge, for all the days granted to you both. That was the gift Sarah and Benjamin had given their family, their community, and anyone who heard their story. Proof that love, real and lasting love, was worth every struggle it took to find and keep it. The sun set over the Irving Ranch as it had for more than a century, painting the sky in golds and purples and reds. The cattle grazed peacefully. The house stood strong and welcoming. The garden bloomed with vegetables and flowers, mixed together just as Sarah had always wanted. And on the ridge, two headstones stood side by side, marking the resting place of two souls who had loved each other across seasons without number, whose legacy was measured not in land or money but in the family and love they had built together, one day, one choice, one season at a time. Their story, like all great love stories, had no true ending, because love like theirs never really dies. It transforms, moves forward, lives on in the people who carry it forward. And somewhere in the great mystery beyond life, perhaps Sarah and Benjamin were still together, still holding hands, still choosing each other, still proving that when you find the right person at the right time, every season becomes beautiful, every challenge becomes bearable, and every day becomes a gift worth celebrating. They had been told it was impossible, that she was unwanted, that no man would choose her. But they had proved the doubters wrong in the most spectacular way possible, by building a life so full of love and purpose that it echoed through generations, inspiring everyone who heard their tale to believe in the possibility of their own happy ending, their own every-season love. And that, in the end, was the greatest legacy of all.